Welcome, age of vintage society. Finally, a video of one of America's most heart-rending cultural icons. It traces Brandon de Wilde's dazzling life as a principal player in the sophisticated and glamorous Broadway and Hollywood of the 1950s, and then in the freewheeling world of California country rock in the 1960s. We'll discuss the inexorable curse of child stardom, the tragic fraying of family bonds, and the recuperative power of love. How Brandon de Wilde tried to seduce Paul Newman. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you're new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Brandon de Wilde, eloquent of clean modern youth. I have an unfortunate tendency to think of de Wilde as the kid from Shane, though he had a substantial career both before and after that early peak. It's both because of Shane is what I first saw him in, and because he made such a great impression in it. But de Wilde was the real deal from beginning to end, the farthest thing from a one-hit wonder, and kept doing good work in film and television and on the stage until his early death at the age of 30. There should be no doubt in any reasonable person's mind that, had he lived longer, he'd have done a lot more. De Wilde achieved fame as the tow-headed, gap-toothed boy who starred in the films The Member, of The Wedding and Shane, the latter of which earned him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor nomination at age 11 for uttering the immortal words, "Shane, come back," to Alan Ladd. He continued into adulthood with similar successes until an obsession with music and a dependence on drugs brought his career to a self-imposed standstill. In a twist of the child actor's curse, de Wilde's problems arose not from a lack of work, but rather from a continuation of it. Well into his late 20s, his youthful features had him performing roles as teenagers and college students. First married in 1963 at age 21, the union lasted until 1969, producing one son, Jesse. A second marriage in 1972, turning drug-free, and a return to the stage were all cut short when de Wilde was killed in a motor vehicle accident at age 30. In a century of history, one would expect some tragic stories related to the historic Elitch Theatre, and Brandon de Wilde is certainly one of those stories. He was an acting prodigy, debuted on Broadway at the age of 7, and by the time he was 12, he had starred in a blockbuster film, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. In 1972, de Wilde appeared at the historic Elitch Theatre in Butterflies Are Free with Maureen O'Sullivan and Karen Grassel. On July 6th, days after his final July 1st performance, de Wilde's life was cut short when he was killed in an accident on 6th Avenue at Kipling in Lakewood. He was on the way to the hospital to visit his wife when he lost control of his van in the rain and he crashed. He was born into a theatrical family in Brooklyn, to a Dutch, English, Huguenot-French father who had a career as actor. He worked with Tallulah Bankhead in The Little Foxes and appeared as well in 5 other shows, including Brother Rat, and in numerous television programmes. And an English-Scottish former actress mother who had performed in Tobacco Road, Brandon was something of a child prodigy in performance. His career was launched with vigour in the Broadway run of Carson McCullers' The Member of the Wedding, where he played the starring role of John Henry West beside Ethel Waters and Julie Harris, and under the direction of the legendary Harold Clurman, who thought him an enchanting boy. The de Wildes were living in Baldwin, Long Island, and Brandon's father Frederick was stage managing member on Broadway. His friend Terry Fay, the casting director, knew the boy and suggested Fritz bring his son in for an interview. Brandon's parents were anything but anxious to have their child in show business. They kept postponing the interview in the hope that a child actor would be uncovered to play the important role. When the de Wildes could no longer stand answering the phone requests, they finally brought Brandon in to see producer Robert Whitehead. He looked the boy over and then asked the father, "Can he act?" "I don't know," was the honest reply. But Whitehead decided the lad looked the part so perfectly that he urged Fritz to let Brandon read for the role. Unhappily, the parent took his son home to study up on a scene which was to be read the next morning. He rehearsed the disinterested youngster that night. The next morning Brandon awakened his dad and recited the entire scene from memory, not only his own, but Miss Waters's part as well. As John Henry, Brandon was precociously charming, thickly bespectacled, curious about everything the adolescent Frankie and her mammy Bernice had to say about trauma, rejection, and being alive. Rarely was he off the stage, lurking in corners, perched upon the table, posing in Frankie's clothes, asking far too pertinent questions, all with a bravura display of confidence and poise. In 1952, when Stanley Kramer produced a film version with Waters and Harris, under the helm of Fred Zinnemann, Brandon was again cast, but now his tour de force performance had an indelible place on screen, so much so that he came to the wider attention of Hollywood. There are numerous provocative and deeply touching moments with John Henry in the film, among which are his almost successful cheating at cards, his cooing adoration of Frankie's outlandish dress for her brother's wedding, Bernice, which one is your mind's eye? In his slightly shrill, exceptionally articulate voice, the voice that never stops questioning, the voice that can never be told enough, a voice especially evocative, perhaps, as with Waters and Harris, he sings the hymn, "His eye is on the sparrow." Waters dubbed him a perfect gem, and Zinnemann recollected a lovely little boy, completely professional and self-disciplined, and with a wry sense of humour. Everyone was charmed by him. If Bosley Crowther found the screen John Henry delightfully mettlesome and humorous, but lanky in the legs, Brooks Atkinson 2 years earlier praised the script as masterly and allocated Brandon de Wilde's stage performance a paragraph of its own. Brandon de Wilde, who is 7.5 years old, plays the neighbourhood boy with amazing imperturbability. This is a vastly humorous part, and Brandon won all the hearts in the audience last evening, for he is resourceful and self-contained, and Mr. Clerman, who has a special gift for the parts of children and young people, has staged these interludes tactfully and amusingly. To both stage and screen, de Wilde brought a certain palpable innocence coupled with a directness and physical attractiveness that could be variably modelled depending on narrative needs, much as would a major star, but already at his very young age. A year after the Zinnemann film, and sporting a Dutch-style bowl cut, the boy was working for George Stevens in Wyoming and at Paramount Studios in the role that more or less seeded his career and became iconic in the history of American film, that of Joey Starrett in Shane. Again that querulous high-pitched voice, "Shane, Shane, come back, Shane!" Again the young boy looking up at his favourite adult as an icon of truth and purity. It was easier for people watching the Technicolor Shane than for even the eagerest viewers of the black and white wedding to see and admire Brandon's platinum blonde hair and sharp, glittering sky-blue eyes. His behaviour with Van Heflin and Jean Arthur in this film is so naturalistic, so spontaneous, that it is difficult to conceive of them as other than his real parents. Bosley Crowther writes that Brandon shows a very wonderful understanding of the spirit of a little boy amid all the tensions and excitements and adventures of a frontier home. As a matter of fact, it is the concept and the presence of this little boy as an innocent and fascinated observer of the brutal struggle his elders wage that permits a refreshing viewpoint on material that's not exactly new, for it's this youngster's frank enthusiasms and naive reactions that are made the solvent of all the crashing drama, and it's his youthful face and form, contributed by the precocious young Brandon de Wilde, that Mr. Stevens as director has most creatively worked with through the film. But it is Master de Wilde, with his bright face, his clear voice, and his resolute boyish ways, who steals the affections of the audience and clinches Shane as a most unusual film. As to the bonding between Joey and Shane, lad, it is a celebrated token of 1950s screen interaction. When Joey calls after Shane, the name Shane not only rhymes with pain, but becomes a perfect metronome for suffering and redemption in the reddening sunset. For this performance, Brandon de Wilde became the youngest actor ever to receive an Academy Award nomination. It was a time in his life when he was beginning to experience and value independence, A publicity release offered that his room in the de Wilde's West 86th Street apartment. It was furnished like a den, twin couches instead of beds. He has a built-in hi-fi set, his own record player, built-in bookcases. The walls are sand colour, there's a gold rug, the couch covers are greenish velvet, with vari-coloured throw pillows, and in tribute to his status as a young adult, he has his own telephone in his room. The basic rate being paid by his parents, anything over by Brandon from his allowance. He was openly opinionated about the proper behaviour for teenagers on dates, holding a point of view that by today's standards would seem modest, if not downright prudish. He wants looks but something deeper. When you get to be 17 you look for something more, personality. Further, if I meet a girl I bring them home. Johnny Mathis recordings wowed him, as did the writing of Hemingway and Fitzgerald. Roast beef, steak, hot dogs and Chinese food, baseball and the bridge on the River Kwai, not to mention his role models, Helen Hayes, Paul Newman and Marlon Brando, whose surname became his nickname. He was conventional teenager par excellence, but it was worth saying that this creature is not, in the mid to late 1950s, the rebel typified by the young Elvis or James Dean or Brando. The tentative and frustrated sexuality on display in his scene was characteristic of most adolescent relationships in the generally repressive 1950s, with curious and miscomprehending adults always inhabiting the margins of the space where teenagers could interact feelingfully. Brandon de Wilde, as the good boy in difficult situations, was a realist, middle-class icon. In one scene, Janet is in Arthur's basement den discussing his sexual knowledge, which he leads her to surmise is substantial. "I'm glad," says she, approaching him, but he flees to a dark corner and throws himself helplessly and ashamed onto the sofa. She runs over. "I never either." He admits with key light washing over his unblemished face, "I made it all up about other girls. I don't know anything." This portrayal, raw without being uncivilized, was precisely the sort to alienate young men eager to feel and display self-assurance in a similarly virginal state, so that the naughty, improper characters played by such as Clift, Brando, Dean, Allen and Morrow could more easily have attracted them. Brandon's was as powerful in revealing a portrait of conventional youth masculinity at the time as has been put to the screen, pungent especially in his very clear and very clearly suspended and unrealized hunger. Behind the camera, now 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing 145 pounds, Brandon was eagerly dating Carol Lindley. He was a big star and already sexually active. He always said that he was born horny. As a teenager he rarely went more than a day without going down on a man or letting a man or woman go down on him, usually 2 or 3. How did he find all those willing partners at a jailbait age in the police state of 1950s? It helped that he had a stunning face and that he looked, well, innocent. Brandon wasn't sure whether he liked sex with men or women better. Why choose? They were both great. But for sheer physical attraction, that jolt that hits you in the pit of your stomach, it was always men. Especially older, sophisticated, powerful men, the kind who would take you out and show you a good time and maybe help your career. Brandon's first real boyfriend was novelist James Leo Hurley, who got him cast in the film versions of Blue Denim and All Fall Down. Brandon found himself getting aroused at the sight of muscular stage hands and pretty in pink script girls, and he got a lot of invitations. How could he refuse? In 1962, shortly after he and James broke up, Brandon landed a dream role, Lonnie in Hud, about a homosexual teenager who falls in love with his no-good uncle. OK, he wasn't explicitly homosexual in the script, but that's how Brandon intended to play him, especially when he discovered that Hud was to be played by 37-year-old Paul Newman, star of movies like The Long Hot Summer and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, a major sex symbol, arguably one of the most beautiful men in the world. How could Brandon not be in love with him? Paul Newman can have any guy he wants, and he likes them big and built like Brando, Yul Brynner and Rocky Graziano. Why would he pick a skinny 20-year-old kid? What are you going to do, exchange recipes? "I can seduce with the best of them," Brandon exclaimed. On May 21, 1962, location filming began in the town of Claude on the Texas Panhandle. Cast and crew stayed at several hotels in Amarillo. Brandon seduced the desk clerk at Paul's hotel into letting him into his room. Paul came in later to find Brandon on the bed without clothes. Brandon was completely captivated. Paul's fame, his money, his connections that could push a career, none of it mattered. He wanted to be with Paul, share his bed, share his life, no matter what. But he ended up marrying his first wife, Susan M. Moore. He was survived by their son, Jesse. The star's second wife was Janice Jarrow. He married Jarrow 4 months before his death. While his 2 screen performances established a Wilde with enviable gravitas, by some measures his next gig, though now forgotten, was an even greatest measure of his professional success. From 1953 through 54, he starred in his own sitcom Jamie, featuring stage and screen veteran Ernest Truet as his grandfather and Alice Pierce as a comical maid. The show ran 1 season and part of a second before being cancelled. After this high point, de Wilde's star hardly sank like a stone. Quite the opposite. He was in nearly a dozen additional films, many or most of them prestige dramas of one sort or another that put him amidst top Hollywood players. De Wilde gave 56 television performances in the 20 years after 1951, including a 1962 stint on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and a star turn at the eponymous orphan hero in the 1953-54 series Jamie. Among his other film appearances, he stars with James Stewart in James Nielsen's Night Passage, and plays the pivotal role of John Wayne's fated son, Jerry Torrey, in Otto Preminger's In Harm's Way. In the latter film, his scenes with Wayne are striking for their maturity and strength, coming as a resolution of de Wilde's long apprenticeship as the innocent child or young brother looking upward to see which way he should go. On top of his acting career, de Wilde was also exploring a career in rock music, collaborating mostly with Graham Parsons of the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers. One associates him very much with other youth actors of his generation who joined the counterculture, like Millie Perkins, Russ Tamblyn, Dennis Hopper and others. At 3:25 p.m. Mountain Time on July 6, 1972, driving to visit his new wife in the hospital, Brandon de Wilde's camper van collided with a guardrail near the intersection of Kipling Avenue and the Grand Army of the Republic Highway in Lakeview, Colorado. Swerving to avoid another vehicle, he struck a construction trailer parked on the side of the road and was pinned under the wreckage of his motorcycle for some time before being taken to Denver General Hospital. He died 4 hours later. He was 30 years old. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Brandon de Wilde wasn't the only one in the 50s who was interested in men. Watch this video and find out why Anthony Perkins wanted to cure himself from loving men.